Hello, and welcome to the next episode of The Prestige, a podcast about films, filmmaking, film theory, film critique, anything to do with films.
In each programme, we'll be focusing on a particular film and a theme that's loosely based on this, and the idea is to use that one film as a jumping off point to talk about bigger ideas.
After some reviewing, some discussion and argument about if the film's good or not, and then into the topic, we'll finish off with some regular features, things like our recommendations of the week, that kind of thing.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We should start by saying a bit about who we are.
So I'm Rob Maythorne. I spent the last 10 years working on feature films in and around the UK, in and around the world. I work as a film colourist, basically making all the films look pretty.
And my name's Sam Knowles. I'm a teacher in a college in Leeds and also write books and articles about other books, comic books, films, whatever.
Books about books.
Indeed, yes. So I think you should start on introducing our film for this week and giving us your thoughts.
So this week's film is the brand new release, Mad Max Fury Road. The not well delayed, but certainly belated fourth instalment of the Mad Max now quadrilogy, which I think is a terrible word, quadrilogy. It takes the story of Max, sort of set post the events of Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, in which he gets involved in not really spoilers here, but a break for freedom with some women from a tribe in the Australian outback. Now, I absolutely adored this film. I think this film has gone straight into my probably top 5 films of all time. I thought it was as perfect an action film as I've seen in many a years. We'll come on to this in a debate, but I think that the closest thing I can give to it, it's like watching The Matrix for the first time, when it just resets your expectations of what action and what films can do. I thought that whilst it's probably a little light on dialogue and plot, I think that it more than makes up for it in the action scenes, which are beautiful and well choreographed and exciting, and it's a cinematic experience more than watching a film, I'd say.
Okay.
Your thoughts, Sam?
You're not going to like my thoughts. Although we have had a month now of generally agreeing about films, so I think it's high time that we had a bit of disagreement. I was listening to Mark Kermode yesterday. Actually, I had him on in the car and my partner inquired whether I was listening to myself, because apparently you sound like Mark Kermode.
Fair enough.
And
I do kind of look like him as well if I had more hair.
Yes. Yeah, I suppose so. You just need to cultivate the glasses wearing look.
Exactly.
Less said about your film knowledge, the better. Anyway, so Mark Howard was talking about the difference between sort of, I don't know, what a film is about and what a film actually is, and sort of the difference between narrative and experience, I suppose. And I see what you're saying, and I enjoyed the experience. I thought things like there's a pre-credit action sequence, which is admittedly utterly brilliant. And some of the action sequences were thrilling, and yes, you're right, they were beautifully choreographed and edited, but overall I just felt that there wasn't enough of a narrative, and I didn't enjoy it. I can see how the experience is amazing, but I just didn't get on board with it. I thought there were individual performances that were good. Tom Hardy always is good. Charlize Theron was interesting, and Nick Holt was unrecognisable and also really good. But otherwise, yeah.
Genuinely, I think you're the first person I've spoken to or seen online who didn't like this film.
Okay.
It's. I mean, everyone has the right to their own opinions. I can believe it, but it's been almost overwhelming the support this film's had. And it was very interesting for me to see that you weren't on board with it. I think the thing that I have a vlog I talk about this occasionally, and I talked about this, but I think the thing that really struck home with me about Mad Max is that Mad Max could not exist in any other medium.
That's a
A
good
lot of
point.
a lot of films that I love and could exist as a book. Some of them did start off as books. They could exist as comic books. This podcast could exist as a vlog. It could exist as a TV show. There's many other different formats. There isn't a version of Mad Max Fury Road that isn't cinema.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that whilst I would probably agree that it's quite light on narrative and plot, the reason why it's an experience in cinema is because of that. And that's why I linked it to something like Matrix or even Gravity, for a recent example. Those films could not exist as anything else. I read the Matrix comic books. They were dull because it's a cinematic experience.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to try and convince you because I think obviously it has the right to own film. Just for me, it was having talked about Avengers 2 a couple of weeks ago, which we both really enjoyed. This was a wholly different level of experience for me. And it was almost occasionally had to remember to breathe when watching it.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think that your enjoyment of this film is going to enjoy whether you enjoy that experience or not. For me, it was. I watched a lot of films and nothing very samey. For me, it was a blast out of nowhere of an experience. But if you don't enjoy that experience, you aren't going to enjoy the film. If you see what I'm saying.
There were. I think I almost prefer your version of the film to the version that I saw, because what you're saying makes a whole lot of sense. And yeah, I really like that idea. Although liking an idea doesn't necessarily mean that you like the film behind it.
Exactly. I think that's where we get into sort of text and metatext and subtext and things. And I can enjoy, like the Watchmen film. I really like the idea of a Watchmen film. I like the idea that taking that story and putting it on screen. And I look at that film and I appreciate all the individual pieces together. But as a whole, it didn't work for me.
That's one of those things that I saw they'd made a film of a graphic novel I really liked and thought, yeah, I'm not going to watch that. Like Persepolis, I haven't seen the film version of Persepolis because I like the book so much.
I mean, I come from a film loving point of view first, so I'm always intrigued to see the adaptation of the things I love, and sometimes, like Watchmen, you're like, kind of wish you hadn't. But I think that kind of links back to what I was saying earlier, whereas Watchmen is so good as a comic book, and it's kind of about comic books, and that may be one of those stories that really its only true form is a graphic novel. And translating it, even as almost shot for shot they did, just doesn't work. In the same way you could take the storyboard of Mad Max and put it in comic book form, you could do that, but it would not have the same power that it had on screen. And I think that's the reverse is true of Watchmen, and that's why it kind of never sat well with me. It's not worth seeing, to be honest.
It's like anti-recommendations, this podcast.
Yeah. Well, I think I know. I'm all for warning people off bad films as much as I am pointing towards good films. Because if we can encourage a better film market out there. But anyway, that's a whole other podcast.
Let's talk about some of the specifics of this film. Some of the things that were admittedly really good about this film. Because overall I didn't enjoy it, but there were parts of it that I thought were brilliant.
Like what?
Like certain snatches of the dialogue, like the relationship between Max and the women. I particularly liked how Tom Hardy behaves right at the beginning of the film with his total lack of trust for anything. I thought that was really well done.
Mm.
And some of the, I mean, the line "That's not his blood" is just cannot fail to be cool. That's just really good.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, one thing that I did love is what I call the little things of this film.
Mm,
There's just, and I think George Miller does a great job of not explaining them at all.
yeah.
Like the war boys spray their faces silver when they think they're going to die,
Mm,
going off to Valhalla, and that's never really explained at all. But it was a brilliant little moment, like, and this kind of moving into a little bit what we're talking about, but the mythology of this film internally was, I thought, very well done. And I think that the world building that he does, and he does it in very broad strokes and very kind of without a lot of explanation and reasoning behind things, but it's very kind of little things done very well. Things like Bullet Farm, Gas Town, especially with Furiosa. I mean, it's come up a lot in sort of the press around it, but the fact that she, spoiler, has got one hand. And at no point in the film is that explained or made a point of. It's just who she is.
yes, I particularly liked. I don't know if this is something I should have known because I came to this entirely cold. I've never seen any of the originals.
Ah,
Um, Although it was a recommendation of yours that it wasn't necessary to see the originals, so I just
it's
went
really
ahead.
not.
But the half life of the War Boys is something that was not really explained at all, and you just had to work it out for yourself. And draining blood from those with a full life in order to keep you topped up as a war boy was another thing that was just not explained.
And I mean, I think having seen all of the four films, they do kind of hint at that it probably was some sort of nuclear war that led to where we are now. But it's very much a hint. It's very much an unspecified end of the world. The Road Warrior, which is Mad Max 2, has a little sort of preamble that kind of explains some things, but it's once again it's very broad strokes and you get no details. And I think all through the entire film, all four films, it's very much lack of explanation. But I think this ties back to what Sam and I were discussing off air about the idea of myth and myth within these films and these films as myths. I think that for me, obviously these are Australian films made by a director, generally in Australia, and there's something kind of linked to the Aboriginal tales and the stories of the Aboriginal culture that kind of that I feel there's a link between that sort of cultural world and this cultural world, in that there's a supposition of lack of explanation. Aboriginal tales don't go, there was the wet and the dry. And there isn't a lot of, with all myths, there isn't a lot of, well, this is why Hercules is Hercules. The myth is based on archetypes and myth structure, that kind of thing. And I think Mad Max, through all four films, particularly Fury Road, works on that get on board and go for the ride kind of mythology.
Yes, definitely. Something else about it is it's interesting that you should bring up the Aboriginal experience, because I was thinking when you were talking about nuclear war there, and I was thinking about the fact that a lot is made of we broke the world. What have we done to the world?
Mm.
However they phrase it in this film and presumably the other films as well. And just thinking about Australia, I was thinking about how, well, to what extent this is a response to what white settlers did to the world of Australia, whether that includes Aboriginals or not. And there was something. There's a clip doing the rounds on the internet earlier this week of a political commentator called Carla who talks about the Aborigines in Australia and how they were, until the late 1960s, they were classified as flora and fauna, which does something horrible for the humanity or non-humanity of these people. But also it says something about how white people treated Australia as a place, as an
Yes.
environment.
I mean, I think we could spend hours getting into what England did to the world. But I think it does. I mean, obviously we're talking about Aboriginal thing, but I do think that the story of Max and Max's character does tie into what I call a generic myth across cultures. You know, if you look at the lone hero, which basically is what he is, you've got the outlaw samurais, you've got the solo Vikings, you've got obviously you've got Aboriginals going walkabout. You've got the idea of kind of St George over here. Almost all culture, sort of, at least sort of long-term culture, has the existence of a myth of a lone hero. Even America, with its very short history, has Wyatt Earp. It has the gunslinger. There's this enduring myth of the lone hero who breezes into town, gets swept up in a local issue, and forced to fix it. And I think the Mad Max is very interesting in that at times Max himself is very ancillary to the action. I do think he has the hero's journey in the film, but it's very much Charlize Theron's story, and she's very much the driving of the action. But he does tie very much into that kind of someone walking past getting pulled into the action, the reluctant hero, which I think is an enduring myth across cinema, but also across culture.
Yeah, and it's something that is not absent from film at all. I mean, you have something like the first Indiana Jones film, which famously has no plot, because if Indiana Jones were not involved in the film, then it would have happened anyway. So yes. There's something ridiculous about that film, in that he's a bystander to such an extent that he doesn't really matter. And this is sort of taking to an extreme this idea of someone who's sucked into action, and that I particularly like that about Mad Max at the end. I mean, avoiding spoilers, but the way that at the end of the film Max melts into the distance.
Yes,
I particularly enjoyed that. I won't say what happens at the end of the film, but the resolution involves Mad Max, but it also doesn't involve him.
Yes, yeah, he's. I mean, there's been a lot of press about a feminist reading of this film, and I think both Sam and I are far too white and male to pass judgment on whether it's a feminist film or not. I think I've seen arguments both for and against it, and I think I'm happy to say I'm not the one to make that call. But I do think that there's something in the fact that he is a bystander, and yes, he has more agency than Indiana Jones does, but he is still he's a catalyst rather than an action itself. If you see what I'm saying, he's very much not even empowering is even the wrong word, but he is useful, and he's a tool that Furiosa uses. And he's a very cool tool, and he, as a filmic point of view, he's very interesting. And Tom Hardy is I think, a fabulous actor who really kind of owns the screen when he's on it. So I think it's a good call for that. But he is certainly ancillary to decision making at times. I think there are other elements of the film that kind of tie into the idea of myth and mythology, especially looking at the bad guy Joe. He's very much inhuman. He's very much, in the same way that sometimes bad films have treated people with disabilities as inhuman. Like they could easily have made someone like Furiosa with her orphan and disability as an inhuman character, but they don't. They take someone who is, in charge and fully bodied, and they make them inhuman through the skull mask, through the weird white skin and the plastic, but you don't get a backstory to him. But he is very much almost a boogeyman. He's very much kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? He's very kind of like lurking in the distance. Obviously, he is the main threat for the film, but because of the fact that it's sort of vehicular films, it's almost via avatars of vehicles that they have these fights. He himself never throws a punch. He himself never gets into a fist fight or violence, except via the avatar of the cars.
Yeah. It's.
I think
It was interesting what you were saying about disability, because there is something made at the very start of the fact that he has a severely disabled son, but that's like you said, he's the Joe himself is the character that is sort of set apart in this way, and he's referred to by various characters throughout the film as the immortal one.
Yes, yeah. But internally in the text itself, there's a lot of mythology at work. I think, as you haven't seen the earlier ones, there's a very telling bit in the end of Beyond Thunderdome, where Mad Max comes upon a group of kids who were in a plane crash and were saved by Captain Walker, who's the captain of the plane, and the story of their crash and their sort of upbringing has been passed down these kids, and it's become the tell. And to them, there's this mythology around this Captain Walker character, which they project onto Mad Max. And I think that that will come to this one in my recommendations, but that's a great little scene in which you see how this mythology has been born. How some person, something happens, it becomes a story, it becomes history, and history becomes a story, and story becomes mythology.
Mm.
And I think I think you haven't seen the originals, but the Max becomes a bit of a mythological character in the world. They know who Max is.
Yes.
And I think in this one, it's great they removed that. He is just a person. He's just a person who's with them. No one knows the Mad Max name. And in theory, almost if you look at the film, I'm not sure Max knows his name at times. He seems very unsure when he says his name at the end. But that's a fan theory about who he is versus actual text. But I'll get into that at another time and off air with people who've seen the films. But yeah, I think that there's sort of internally to the text, there's a lot of mythology at work.
Yes, it's interesting. You were talking about his not really knowing his own name, and the way that it's really not important. His lack of importance in the film is underlined by the fact that he's just known as Fool for most of it.
Yes.
Or Bloodbag.
Yes, or Bloodbag. Oh, that was really well done. Yeah.
But I think that, I mean, as I say, we started off the conversation talking about Valhalla with the War Boys, that they're going to Valhalla, and obviously that's sort of North mythology kind of pulled in. But that to me feels like, as I was saying with Beyond Thunderdome, where something over time became a mythology for this world. You feel like they've grabbed bits from different places, and they've kind of merged into this one film.
And that's something I think is particularly well done, not only in this, but in other sort of post-apocalyptic films, other films about the future, that sometimes you can go wrong in a film like that if you focus too much on what things are going to be like. And
yes.
there's elements of this and to other successful films where they say, well, society's fallen apart and people would hold on to things from the past. So that introduction of Valhalla, which is, as you said, from Norse mythology, something very old, something ancient, is combined with a guy playing an electric guitar carried on the front of a war rig, for example. And that's something this film did very well, was the combining of the two, of past and future.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, if you remember from the 90s, they used to be a show called The Tribe on TV, which I have a deep love for, was well aware it was terrible. And that had a similar sort of thing, but it wasn't as sort of well thought out. I mean, this, obviously, you've got, like, we're all aware the production design of this film is massively over the top and out there. Everything is spiky. Everything is end of the world. Everything is a blind man with a guitar that shoots fire in front of giant speakers on a war rig. And the Tribe was very much shooting for that kind of feel of picking up the bits and bobs and making something new. And it didn't really work in the Tribe because low budget and kids and stuff. It wasn't quite as adult. But I think that's evident in the text and the set design, and almost the sort of the metatext of it is the kind of combining of bits and bobs. That they've taken some things from here. Like all the cars are made of other things. I mean, even the war rig that Furiosa drives has got other cars put on it as sort of guard posts, and everything is made up of the remnants of other things. And obviously the society is made of remnants of other things, and obviously the film itself is made up of little bits and bobs from every other myth and other film out there. And it does feel like they've cobbled together all these bits from other places, and it works, and it comes together as a whole. And I think that there's a element of that in the kind of the patchwork nature of the story, of the set design, of the world, that kind of ties it all quite nicely together.
Well, as I said at the very beginning of this podcast, I didn't like the film, and I prefer your version of it because that all sounds really good.
I think that there's. I think we'll come on to this at some point if we talk about something like Pacific Rim. I really like Pacific Rim, but it didn't get a great review when it came out. But for me, I think it's an incredibly smart film. It's just not
about Pacific Rim every week, whatever our film is.
It's amazing. But it has a visual intelligence that isn't a scriptural intelligence. But I'm pretty sure that's my 10 years in the film industry talking rather than anything else. But as always, we finish up our podcast with some recommendations.
Yes.
Well,
I was just going to go this week because I had 3 last week. I'm paring it down. I've just got 1 recommendation.
Okay.
In the vein of chase films and thrillers and action, although not a lot of action takes place, I'd say just go and watch Jewel because it's brilliant. That's all for this week.
Jewel was going to be one of our recommendations.
Now I'm glad I went first.
I'm going to throw in 2 recommendations to balance out. One of which is called The Cars That Ate Paris, which is another Australian film, and is a heavy influence on the design of Mad Max. There's a car in Mad Max that's covered in spikes all over, and that is very much a direct lift from The Cars That Ate Paris. It's a 1974 film directed by Peter Weir. It's it's odd in the way Australian films are, but it's well worth checking out. The other one I was going to recommend was Bronson. Now, Bronson is the story of Charles Bronson, a infamous British prisoner, but played by Tom Hardy.
And we could just do a whole podcast series around Tom Hardy.
We could, as long as we talk about his terrible films as well.
Okay, yes.
But yeah, I think Bronson is if you want to sort of see the range that Tom Hardy has, he has the madness that you get in Mad Max occasionally here, but a lot more layers to it. I think I recommend that as a sort of a further reading from Mad Max Fury Road. Good.
Well, I think we've just about hit the 30-minute mark. That's enough for this week.
Lovely, Jimmy.
I'm going to try it. I'm not going to fall apart this time.
Go for it.
I would just say thank you very much for listening. Do get in touch. We're on Twitter at Prestige Podcast. I'm on Twitter myself as at Life Academic.
I'm on Twitter as Kaiju Industries.
And we look forward to talking about films next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye.